The Data Governance Act allows member states to offer secure processing environments where the data can be accessed in a way that can be controlled. So it's not open for everybody. You can filter who gets access to it, under which conditions, on which services you build on top of that. For instance, to anonymize or pseudonymize the data, or just to implement agreements and assurances that you have to make sure that people don't just put the data out there for everybody to reuse. And the framework that we have on data intermediation services are a variant of that, and allows you basically to provide a specific service provider, to establish a service provider, a new company, a new organization that specializes in precisely that, setting up new technologies and new infrastructures to allow data to be shared. And we've seen already in the past few years, and then I'll wrap up, how important that can be from a policy perspective. I think we're all familiar with the challenge of making sure that, for instance, healthcare information can be shared freely with academic institutions that conduct healthcare research, with pioneers, with biotech organizations that try to develop new cures for rare diseases. They need access to a lot of information. And if you only get information within your own country, that's too limited. You need secure environments where that data can be shared more broadly. But it's not just about academic research and the progress of science. If you look at, obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic, that was another situation where there was a lot of sensitive information available on the spread of the virus, hospital capacity, dissemination, availability of vaccines, vaccination rates, and that information also had to be shared between hospitals within a country, but also at the EU level scale. And we see the same thing, for instance, in climate change. You need a lot of data, some of which is sensitive, to be shared. And for those kinds of solutions, you can rely on the granular technologies that we have, secure processing environments, trusted research environments, data intermediation services. And so what we want to do in this session, and then I'll pass the floor to our first speaker, what we want to do in this session is to tell you that story a little bit and to show you what exists, what is out there, what actually works, because this is, these aren't visions for the distant future, but these are solutions that are available right now, which will not replace the benefits that you get from the open data approach, but which do offer a solution for cases where making data fully available for everybody is not the ideal approach. And we want to show you a little bit how you can create societal value from that, economic value, social benefits, and how this can be an important part of the future European data economy. That's just a very brief introduction. Like I said, we have some very good speakers lined up for you, and I'm very happy to pass the floor to the first of them, Professor Gard Thomassen. I think is one of the veterans in this field, not only in terms of academic research on these types of solutions, but also at actually building and maintaining solutions that work in practice. So yeah, I'm very happy to pass the floor to you. Gard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for letting me speak here. A little thing, I'm not a professor, but thank you very much. So I'm located in Oslo, Norway. I'm the IT director here at the university. And one of our main services is our own brew services for sensitive data. And today I'll try to present our service in a little bit more detail, but we have this group of people or organization called NOR3, so Norwegian Trusted Research Environment, which consists of 3 platforms and 4 universities. So the 4th university is a consumer and kind of guardkeeper that we are really on the edge and really delivering what the end user wants. So let's get to it. So the agenda today, a little bit about NOR3 and then into the services that we operate here. As Hans said, this is a real service. It's operating, it's operational. And when I set out as a project leader, my first job here at the IT services was in 2012, 1st of January. I quit as a bioinformatics postdoc because we had nowhere to go with our sequencing data. We had the sequencer, but we had nowhere to go, nowhere to compute, and everything was full and blah, blah, blah. We couldn't work. And so I really had a drive to do this because I was kind of solving the question of my former colleagues. And then I'll say a few words on how to build and operate a trusted research environment and some examples on what can be done in this setting. And then the big key of this session, can we do fair sensitive data? And what's down the road? So we consist of 3 services, of which the service called TSD, formerly known as LSD, but that was not a good abbreviation, is the biggest one, and it's also offered on the European Open Science Cloud, so you can consume it, and anyone in the world can use the service. It's a little bit of a hassle to get started as a PI, because you don't have a Norwegian governmental identity that's electronic. We're working on it with the EIDAS for European electronic ID, but it's not a big hassle, but it's a little bit more than a Norwegian PI. It's a collaboration between 4 universities, as I said, and basically we are working on getting a trust and federation between these 3 services in Norway, so that you can utilize the various differences and strengths across the platform. And we try to use this as a stepping stone for the European health data space. So we're ready. So how can we be more interoperable? How can we move data? How can we move software in containers? And how can we perhaps trust a user from another platform without too much hassle? So the service here in Oslo, it delivers about 1,800 active research projects. As sensitive data projects, even though in social science, medicine, or whatever, they have an end date. So basic turnover is 1 new project every day, and 1 project ends every day. So very much of this is automated and self-service, of course. And we serve about 90 institutions across Norway and a few institutions abroad. And we are what we like to call a platform as a service. So we deliver, I'll get a bit more to it, but we deliver HPC for the guys with big data. We deliver databases for those who need that. We deliver a virtual desktop for those who only want Excel to handle some survey data or registry data. And then we do a couple of special services. I'll get back to those a little bit. And the coolest thing, I think at least, is we do smartphone applications for data collection and actually also communication with research objects. And that's a killer application, because today we see that research objects, they have a little bit of feeling of what's in it for me. And also the researcher can share important information about that subject back to that individual subject. For instance, whether you are good at following your dietary program. We do a lot of APIs so that other people can actually also develop a smartphone application and send it to our secure backend. It's not that hard to make a safe smartphone application, but it's quite hard to make a secure backend that can talk to it. And there's quite a lot of data and moving data. So the big success is that we support the entire life cycle of a project that handles sensitive data that has a high economic impact, high risk impact, or high societal impact, and shouldn't be available to anyone. And we basically serve it from, you can use this service for a consent service, so that, and that would be even better when we have a European ID. But in Norway, everyone has what's called a bank ID, which gives you an access to a secure and highly verifiable signature. So you can sign up that, hey, you can use my data, or I'm ready to give my data away. And then we can capture data in a whole lot of ways, and we can move data in and out. And this is kind of the crux of handling data. Everybody that's entitled should be really, really easy to move data into a secure system. And when you can move data in, very often you can move data out. And we have separated those, and that's quite hard in a technical manner. And it's only the primary investigator who's at the very first is entitled to take data out, because they're also responsible of the entire project. But they can delegate the responsibility. And all this is self-serviced because it doesn't scale in any other matter, and in any other manner. And then, of course, we serve the opportunities of compute. And when we say collaborate, this is also extremely important. As a PI, you can let anyone in the world into this system. You don't have to be Norwegian, you don't have to this and that, but you have to be entitled. So for instance, for certain types of data, it's a problem if you let the person that's located in the US into the system, because they can see the data on screen, and that's many times that's considered as a data handout. Even though you can't download it, it's still a data transfer to the US. So, but that's the PI's responsibility. And of course, we help especially researchers from University of Oslo, but we also help other researchers in what's the general view of this within the GDPR legislations. And then also the last thing is a feedback service where we can actually hand data out back to the citizens of Norway. So if I, as a researcher, want to give something to Hans, for instance, and Hans in this case is Norwegian, he can actually log in with his bank ID. He doesn't have to know anything about the system, and he can see data about himself that the researchers want to share back. And just a little bit about the complexity, and this is in Norwegian. It says basically that the Directorate of e-Health in Norway scraps an IT project after spending about 20 million euros and several years. And this shows a bit of the complexity, because these guys set out to lower the time of handing out registry data and building a complementary service to our service on doing this. And it was very much a top-down project, and it completely crashed. So the login, very easy, two-factor, and this login is our own, which opens up for any user in the world. You don't have to be this or that. As long as the PI says that you're okay, you're okay. And for people who's not Norwegian, there's a little bit of extra step to make you and your PI make sure that there's no man in the middle, but it's still self-service. The only problem is a non-Norwegian PI, which is a little bit of extra hassle, but any PI can okay any other person. When you log into the system, we produce a Windows work environment, a Linux work environment, and of course, regular software, containers, blah, 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 whatever you would normally want as a researcher. And if there's any special need in the Linux world, you can install yourself in the user space. In the Windows world, we have AppLocker, so we have to install for you. And if there's a generic need, we install. And we love people who like open source software, because licensed software is complicated. The data collection part is really, really cool, because then we can make services on the outside where we collect data from wearables. My big dream is to let anyone in Norway hand off their data from wearables and make the metadata available, so that researchers can cherry pick and ask people, hey, can I use your data? We're not there yet, but we're very close, but we need the incentive and the last part of the financing. We have made a dictaphone, and it's generic. We deliver almost, I think it's about one speech that's recorded every minute from about 12,000 active dictaphones all over Norway. And we can do different web applications. For instance, the one with the people here is to report if you're in pain. And then it's the data. The data was the clue of today's talk, and there's a data portal for this, where it's really easy to import files, and if you're entitled to it, you can export files. And if I would have liked to, I could have recorded this session here and streamed it directly into the secure data processing environment. And this is quite cool, because if you're in a in a research setting where you need to record some sensitive data in a Zoom session or any online session that's okayed for this type of use, you can at the same time record it. And of course, we then offer services like Whisper to automatically transcribe the data. And then we have a publication portal, and you can publish data between different research projects, because there's often so that you can't move data between research projects because of the legislations and the ethical improvements and so on. But if you're entitled to, you can move data. And also you can send data to an external portal where people can download it if they're entitled to. And here we think about also automatically transferring it to another trusted research environment if you can prove that you're entitled, and in a really well-trusted way say, I want it to end up in project X in a trusted research environment in France, for instance. And you can build this system self-serviced. So in this case, we had a project where we used a smartphone application, or it was a tablet application actually, on an iPad, where people who had blood disease at the hospital, they could report what they were eating and drinking during the day. And then we reported that back to the nurses. And here is the setup on how you view it. I want to share report 1 to the people working at Rikshospitalet, which is the national hospital, and on blood disease. And I can select that group and I hit share. And then the nurses can use their bank ID to see the report. And if the report said patient X is eating too little, the doctor has to intervene. Then they did that. And the nurses and the patients loved this. And it more or less became a company afterwards. It actually became a company, and we're trying to sell this back to elderly homes where people have a problem with eating enough. Technology-wise, it takes a lot to build this. We have about 20 people working full-time on this service, and the funding has come from different researchers and research groups, and also the Research Council in a little bit, who have seen that we cannot make this on our own. We need a really powerful IT organization. And I have about 350 people. And altogether, we use about 20 man-years to do this and deliver this. So it's a little bit of a warning. Don't do this as a hobby project. If you really want to go here, you have to have some basic funding and you have a good plan and competence. Some examples: we are doing all the heavy lifting for the Norwegian Cancer Registry. We are serving the data collection from the biggest mother-child study in the world, which is held by the Norwegian Institute of Public Health. And we did, COVID was mentioned, we did the COVID study where we have about 250,000 people consenting overnight, and we actually took down the Norwegian bank ID system. And we are operating clinical solutions for 2 of the hospitals in Norway, and we're also operating for the coolest cancer study these days in Norway, where they sequence cancer patients and test out different medicine. And then we have this app I mentioned where we track what you eat and give feedback. And there's also a bit of gamification to make elderly people eat. So in the real world or in the real life, how do you do this? Our recommendation is if you want to build this, you have to have someone, a paying customer or a research project with a lot of money and the willingness to be a little bit of trial and error. And our idea was to always keep it safe, but not always keep it working. So we rather fail on the functionality than the security. And we did that from about 2014 to 2016. And since then, we've been fairly stable. And then think about externalizability of services. So basically what Jeff Bezos says about building services. And then if things have a really, really high impact, then you do it. So when the boss of Elixir calls and says, come on, please help us with the VP14 in EOS Life, we did that. If you look at this from the bottom up, there's a layer of infrastructure, and then you have to have an integration system where you can manage the infrastructure through APIs so that people can actually self-service their infrastructure. And then we build on top of that, and in the end, the clients where the actual logging in and analysis is done. And there's a whole lot, I won't go into detail, whole lot of tech buzzwords, and basically we're a DevOps center on this. And we are in the planning of doing this ISO certification. We're fairly close. This is a part of making us ready for the European health data space. And this makes us also have full control of change and change advisory. So in a word cloud setting, we do a lot of stuff. And I would say the most important part and what is the help desk. Because if we're not really good at doing support and consulting, people would go elsewhere, meaning that they will go to some unsecure solution in most cases, and then the trust to research in Norway and Europe will basically be lower, and people won't donate their data in the very end. So when it comes to sensitive data, is this really possible? And we have had a lot of interest into this, and we've been thinking quite a bit of it. And also there's a juridical question: can you actually publish metadata in all settings? And there might be cases where you shouldn't even publish the metadata. But what we're working on is, sorry for the box here, but it's how can we export metadata and make the PI responsible that the metadata does not contain any sensitive data. And the idea is to be able to export the metadata to any portal that can receive metadata, and where people can search and say, okay, in Norway, they actually done a social science study on how the discussions around the dinner table is when it comes to families that has moved to Norway from countries in Asia, and how they use the language. Okay, I'm interested. And then I can actually ask or discover this data as a researcher or a citizen, and I can ask the researcher through this portal, can I get access to your data? And then there is some kind of access committee, and that cannot be us as a service provider, because we do not have the right to control the data. We're just a data processor as a TSD or as a TRE or SPE service. And the access committee more or less has to be handled either at some governmental level or by the actual PI themselves, because they know how they got to the data in the first place. They know the details of the consent and so on and so forth. But this is our basic idea. We're working on this, and we're not very far from having a first go at this. And one of the drivers between this has been the Human Brain Project, or now the eBrains. And I think that project is more or less come to an end, but in the Norwegian node has lots of data, and it's really important that we have the data securely stored, but that it's possible to find it. So we've been working quite a lot with these guys, and we would like to export the metadata to one of the eBrain data portals. In by COVID, we did the same together with ECRIN and then a couple of other big actors. And the idea was to share data from clinical COVID trials. So you could upload your clinical data trials into our service, and then the metadata was or is exported to the ECRIN service, where people can find it, and then they can ask for access. And that's operational, but it's not generic. That's for clinical trials. And the forerunner of that by COVID was actually the Crisis Work Package 14 for the EOS Life, where we did this during COVID and everything was in haste, but we kind of made it more stable by COVID. And now we're trying to also extend it to other diseases than COVID. Another cool project which uses this today is an EU project called AI Mind, where they're looking at how to use AI to simulate the brain. And also they look into explainable AI. And in this setting, it's really, really important that researchers from all over Europe work together. Part of this is done in our service. They log in from all over. And the data and the metadata is being kept both inside our service, and metadata is kept outside. And it's a whole lot of data and a really, really big project. So I'm getting towards the end here, and now we are into the EOSC and Trust project, which is one of the EOSC-funded Trusted Research Environment projects. We had a kickoff now in Amsterdam last week. No, early this week. And the idea there is to make the Norwegian Trusted Research Environment, together with others in Europe, Elixir and others, ready for the European health data space. That's one of the ideas. And to prove this via some examples and also to write policy documents. How should this be? How should it not be? And where should we go in the future? And it's really, really exciting. And I really hope that we have some really useful use cases. I'll try to look into the questions in the chat, and then I'll be here for the open question session later. And I think that was my last slide. And of course, you'll get the slides, and here's a link for the service. You're more than welcome. And the questionnaires can be used all over Europe, but you cannot have it verified by a login. So it has to be an open questionnaire where you can put in your name or things like this. So many of this is useful outside of Norway. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the very good presentation. I think for me it was very interesting because it seems to me like this is a service that sort of developed very organically, and it seems to be very much driven not so much by this mastermind plan right from the beginning, but sort of saying, okay, well, what is the immediate need? What is the problem that we have to solve? Let's solve this now, and then gradually integrate that and expand that into a more mature ecosystem. And this is, I mean, we have a lot of questions in the chat. We'll get back to them during the Q&A session, but I find that very interesting to see how you enhanced maturity of the platform by looking at, first these more academic use cases, and then integration of direct interactions with users, things like wearables, and where you have this new dimension of having to interact with normal people and not just with people who are specialized in this area, and then saying, okay, how can we scale this up? Things like access committees, ethics rules, and sort of expanding that. We have a bunch of questions like how this fits indeed into other EU levels initiatives, because it seems like this is a good component that others can build on. So we have tons of interesting questions, but as promised, unfortunately, we keep those for the Q&A session. So people will have to be patient a little bit longer, because we also want to move now to the second presentation from the colleagues at DataSpace. So we have Jana ready and waiting there. We also have, I think, a very interesting and a very complementary story to tell, because I think this one focused on this particular infrastructure, which is very health-oriented. And I think the story and the perspectives and the opportunities that you have with DataSpace have basically a much more open ending. But I'll pass the floor on to you, Jana. I'll be very happy to hear what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Hans, for a nice introduction, and also Gart for a great intro, because that really is reflecting my past, building the first GDPR compliant for the secondary use of healthcare data in Finland. So how to build these secure data handling environments has been my passion for 30 years, working with data analytics. So very happy to be here. Good morning from Finland. Yes, so as Hans explained, DataSpace Europe, we are a private company, and actually focusing solely on the potential that we see from the Data Governance Act and we see from the Data Act for increased data sharing potential within Europe. So just briefly about our background, and then my colleague Juhani Luomakyynä will continue on the more practical side of our company and explaining the solution. But yes, we are very happy to get early days in January. We got this recognition from Traficom being the first EU recognized data intermediation service, as explained in the Data Governance Act. So we have been working very actively with those European frameworks for data sharing, data spaces like IDSA research programs and Gaia-X. But actually, the origins come from as a spin-off for Cinia, which is the special state-owned company in Finland focusing on cybersecurity and data operator businesses in Finland. And the Finnish Farmers Association is also one of our main owners. So this negotiating power, my data thinking, giving the power data sovereignty back to the farmers is very core in our operations. Then we have smaller companies also being owners at our company and funding from Finnish Climate Fund and Business Finland. Actually, the Finnish Climate Fund claims that we are the most ESG-driven company in their portfolio because this social sustainability of the farmers and primary production is very much in the core. And also because I see that all these sustainability and green funding developments in the future will push us towards more complex data sharing and data processing needs. So I think that in the future we will see a lot more hybrid approaches for this for the data handling and data, how to build those data ecosystems. So as said, our company started from an initiative at Citra, at Cinia in 2016. And at that time, I was actually working in Citra, building together with the Finnish ministries. We were building this foundation for European data economy. So it's very nice to see how the private company at that time was very much lying on the European principles and benchmarking with the Commission with different stakeholders how the future solution should look like. So the core value net core is from the origins. It was planned as a compliant solution for the future EU data strategy and also those regulative needs. But then we started our own company in June 2022 and called it Data Space Europe, and the product was launched. The ValueNet was relaunched as a Triton solution. So as explained earlier, a long history working very closely and checking with the latest developments, and also seeing these new sustainability demands as a big push then for these secure data handling needs to increase and to create the data markets in the future. And what's core in our solution is that we have two separate, let's say, flows or control flows. For this consent-based data sharing, we have a special control flow and components needed to support that flow. And then for the data intermediation, we have a data flow and components needed to support it. But I will now let Juhani to continue. He's my old colleague from the Citra times and from SAS Institute, so we are kind of not the digital twins, but almost like mental twins on the topic.
Thank you,
So
Jana.
please go ahead.
Thank you, Jana. And I'm happy to be a digital twin for you because it makes me younger. So, Johanni from Data Space Europe, and a few words about our Triton solution, as described earlier, started a long time ago, seeing already to the future. And the basic layers, the overall layer is Triton contracts, which covers the governance. So joining our ecosystem, agreeing to the rules, and from that base, in the end, data usage agreements automated in our solution. And especially for the farmers, we have two kind of solutions for the service providers, for the farmers, the Triton Enterprise, the business side of the thing. The service providers describe their solutions and which data is required to use those products or services. And for the farmer, the Triton Essential, which is merely the browsing the ecosystem. Okay, here's a nice service. I know those people, and okay, here are the data usage agreements, and this is the data I'll be consenting to, and I accepting them. And at the bottom layer, Triton connectors, which is somebody is interested, Docker containers, and very easy to implement. So this is the layers of the Triton solution. And see how it works. So we have two organizations. They have discussed earlier, decided that they wish to exchange data or share data. So the organization A and B have been discussing, okay, and they joined Triton. They become our customers with a service agreement using Triton Enterprise. So the organization who has the data, they write their data descriptions and the terms of usage and publish them to the Triton ecosystem. And the organization B, expecting already out there, sees those terms. Okay, I can accept those terms for which the kind of who has the cost of data sovereignty in hand. And when they sign that deal, there's a consent in place. So this is the control flow of the solution. And technically, when an organization becomes our customer, enterprise customer, they get a connector, which is a Docker container, and they install it in their environment. So both of them do. So actually, this is what I call loose coupling. The connector is not directly connected to the source systems. For instance, SAP. Nobody wants to connect to SAP directly. The organization creating the data is responsible for delivering that data to the Triton Enterprise Connector endpoint, where it's encrypted, passed away the Triton bus, which is your Kafka solution, and the other end, the organization, delivers the data and utilizes it. So the organizations are separate, but they are connected. Our Triton solution, according to the DGA, we cannot touch the data, we cannot use the data, we cannot see the data. So we are kind of outsiders, just enabling the service. And this has been kind of a thinking exercise for companies. Okay, so we have our own ways to produce the data. Yeah, you can do anything you want, as long as the data is contents are what the receiver expects them to be. And they have discussed earlier, and the Triton ecosystem ties them loosely together. So this is how it basically works. Wish to Jana explain this big picture.
Yes, let's go back to the big picture. So, of course, what we want to do is to facilitate data ecosystems to emerge, and I think it's a huge demand for the huge mindset change also. When we are talking about data sharing, larger pools of data, companies are more accustomed to operate on their own data and siloed data, hiring their own data scientist. So how to make this co-innovation work in practice? This is the big picture we are planning, or we are dreaming about here. So of course, as a foundation, we have this data intermediary service, and it's a kind of a regulated entity or Traficom has agreed the terms that we operate on, we cannot touch the actual data, but we can create, based on the metadata, we can create this kind of marketplace for data-driven services, and data products or data holders can find service developers there. So basically, building those yellow pages for data and service providers is where the actual business kind of starts. So, but as a foundation for this whole thinking, we have a Citra's Fair Data Economy Rulebook as a foundation. So, and we are also planning to set up a steering group that governs the whole ecosystem, defines the rules, how to connect to the ecosystem. And from there, we've made our own constitutive agreement for setting up the ecosystem. And this is as a starting point, we are starting from the farming sector and farming data, agricultural data. So constitutive agreement, how we set up the system, how we set up the steering group, and what are the incentives for data sharing, what are the technical terms, legal terms, and so forth. Like using this soft infrastructure to make sure that our technical backbone is used in a right way. From there, based on the metadata, we are hoping more and more service providers to find to our marketplace and start co-creating the services. And then for the let's call this a primary use case, like we have a AI-based companies, AI service providers who develop AI for the farmers. And the primary use of those services have their own logic, but then if you reuse the data, if you want to create aftermarkets for data, like reusing the data not for the original purpose, but instead developing for insurance products, then there should be some compensation to the farmers as well. So this consent-based data sharing is a key in creating these fair data markets, so to say, because you need to be very nuanced in a way that you allow others to use the data and reuse the data, and you need to be able to control the data flows in a very detailed way. So that's why we think that my data thinking is very, very key in the early stage of making data flow, especially in the farming system where there's a division between personal data and non-personal data is very blur. So it's important to make these principles clear. So basically, with this data intermediation service, we enable data markets to flow, to emerge, and from there, if there's end customers wanting to reuse the data, like industry, researchers, authorities, commercial service providers, data analyst companies, or data platforms, they all kind of ask and agree based on accession agreement, their permit to use data in the right way, as explained in the rule book we are using. So this is a big picture. We currently have about 10 different use cases, 10 different users of our ecosystem. So we are very much in the beginning, only just gathering the user experiences and user feedback. But there's one very interesting case also in Gaia X context for cross-border data sharing, Potato X, which is the Juhani can explain a little bit in detail, but things are moving forward. But I think it's a huge change also in the current practices for data-driven service creation.
I can take it from here.
Yeah.
Sure. about the potato eggs, which is an interesting experiment. Exchanging information between two European data spaces already existing. And although we are both GAIA-X and IDSA compliant, it's not that easy to exchange data, but we managed to do it, and it will be published later this year, the results, but it looks promising. There has to be a small bridge because we are using new technology, Kafka bus, and the other end is using old Microsoft.NET architecture. But the GAIA-X and IDSA brought us together so we can build a data space and exchange data. But the use case for farming, this here is I used to do is animated, so I have to explain. There's a farmer making a decision whether to use additional fertilizing. I'm just a city boy, so I don't know, talk about that, but usually decision made is the traditional way. My father did it this way, his father did it this way, I do it this way. And then just a coin, it goes bad or it goes good. And then we have another thing, possibility called fact-based decision. So the three players here, Yield Systems, Soil Scout, and the provider of the FMIS solution, they are isolated, and the farmer is using the FMIS solution. He might be or she might be buying solutions from Yield or Soil Scout, but they are competing about the farmer's intention, or the who get the farmer as a customer. So when they join Triton, the farmer has the ability to use the combined information from Yield Systems and Soil Scout as a ready-made decision on the field, driving his or her tractor. Should I fertilize? Instead of getting the results separately, you doing an Excel calculation. Okay, it might be good or might be bad. So instead of that, she or he gets the decision almost online. So that's called collaborative data that didn't exist before and exist here because those three players have gained trust using the Triton ecosystem and the rulebook governance model. So collaborative data. And this was on one of the kind of a wish list topics, granularity. On the left side is an FMIS service provider, usually offering services, and the acceptance is check the box and we provide the service. Under or beneath that, it contains information. We can use anything we get our hands on your data. We can do anything what we wanted, and there's no way getting that data back or moving it forward. So the old way of consent management, check the box. In our product, Triton, there's a service product, say they're calculating something for the field. There's a service product describes these are the data sets that we need consent from you. And from each data set, the description and an agreement of you. Sorry, this is finished, but the agreement to use that data. And if that data or contract isn't signed, no data moves. And only that data described in this agreement, instead of check the box, there goes your data. So granularity inbuilt, and it depends lots on the service providers, how accurately and how good they describe their products, so that the farmer looking at the essential in his tract, okay, this looks good, oh, that data, I can accept it, and moves on. And another perhaps more distant case, this was a version of digital product passport, which is pretty kind of say in fashion today. Instead of having a paper document dragging from one vehicle to another, getting wet and smushy, you get an electric document which all parties can access to, and ensuring the buyer that, okay, this is how the stuff I'm buying has come to my premises. And that's something that Triton enables with lots of parties, lots of siloed information. Using the Triton solution, it can be all stored in one digital product passport. And the only obstacle at the moment in proceeding with these passports is the ability of organizations to be able to provide the accurate information. As soon as they get it, they can use Triton, which is easy to take on. I think that was the last one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation. Also, very good as a sort of an overview of some of the broad use cases that you have here, and like I like the farmers example because it's one of those cases, talking about intermediation. Once you've heard an explanation of the use case, it's more intuitively clear about why having an intermediary there might make a lot of sense, to be able to get some sort of objective intervention there, because it is one of those examples where the markets could solve this as well, but then the data winds up with somebody who has maybe very different interests than the farmer themselves. So if you want to say, okay, this isn't just about allowing anyone to use the data for any kind of purposes, but also to build in a layer of protection so that the data isn't used against the farmer's interests, then I think this is something that's very valuable as well. Excellent. I think we're well on schedule. Let me just quickly see, do we have Gard on the panel now as well? Because I don't see him on as the presenters. Yeah, there he is. Okay, perfect. Welcome back. Okay, so we have, once again, we have a very active and interested audience because we have a bunch of questions to go through. I think, Gard, you already used your downtime to answer quite a lot of them. But I still want to have, I have a bunch of questions as well, but I think I'll start maybe with a simple one that's both for you. So both for Gard and for the colleagues of Data Space, you can decide which one it's more appropriate. What do you, like, you've heard each other's presentations, like what do you think is the biggest distinction between the two platforms that you have? So the work that you do, Gard, and the work that you do on Data Space. You're not allowed to say mine is better because it's different, not better, just because there's still the rest of the Q&A, we want to keep it friendly. I don't know, Gard, if you want to start, maybe like what sort of,
I think
would you say that this is it?
Complementing solutions.
That absolutely, but sort of how do you see the big differences?
To me, it's as Johannes says, it's completely complementary, and the one builds on top of the other, and they can both exist on their own. But if they somehow could utilize each other, it would be much better and much closer to like the big goal of the data ecosystem. So I see definitely no competition, only possibilities for collaboration, and it's part of that's happening in the Entrust project.
Yeah, absolutely. And if somebody takes a look at the kind of what you have to offer, okay, if we can use that data, okay, we can handle the consent management. They have the data, so let's use it.
This actually brings me to something that struck me from both of your presentations, because you can approach your services, both of them, very naively and say, it's all up to the users. Some of the terminology was used was like, okay, so it's bring your own data. We have self-services, so the stakeholders need to, take control, or at least to some extent, to bring their data to the platform. We're not going to fetch it for them. They need to bring it there, and they need to have decision rights on what it's being used for. But if you look into the details a little bit, and sort of as the maturity of the platform increases, it does seem to me that you need to understand some of these use cases quite a lot and see, how do we scale this up? You can't just say, it's up to the users. If you click the OK button, then this is now your problem and we don't bother with it. And you both use the concept of fair data sharing as being critical as sort of an idea. And I think, we talked about the My Data rules, the Triton rulebook that you had as well, the Citra rules. But I think the same thing was also true for TSD itself, where you also talked about the possibilities of having an access committee. I was wondering if you can comment a little bit on that issue, on to what extent you think you need to be involved in use cases, or to what extent you can just say, look, I'm the middleman. This is, you make your decisions, you make your mistakes. That's not on me. So
yeah. Good question. I can start a little bit. Anything we have used, we also always been working with a researcher or a research group with a big task ahead of them, and often they have funding. If not, we cannot get anything done. And most of the cases, those researchers has been from our own home institution, where we have kind of the highest trust, and then we're mutually responsible for the ethics and the law and everything. So we start working from that. And the first use case we had was the Norwegian node of the Federated European Genome-Phenome Archive, where there was one special use case, and we built that together with Elixir Norway. And now we're on to the genomic data infrastructure and also by COVID. And then, as my bullet point in the presentation said, build something for someone who has a real use case, who wants to use this, who's urging to use it, and then generalize it and make it available for the general public. And in Norway, we have a word called dugnad, which means that, hey, we all go together and do some stuff. And we've kind of been working with this, that the first guy who has the biggest problem with funding, we solve it. And then we as a platform, we own what we made for that guy, and we're able to use that and resell it, refactor, etc., and work organically. And whatever documentation we use is open, so that another organization can use our legal and ethical thinking, but they're still responsible as another organization if they're the data controller. But we try to help as much as we can, and also it's a scaling and financial problem to follow up everyone. But that's our take. Thank you.
Yes, and I think that we are in a stage where we still need to do a lot of active kind of prototyping together with the partners to concrete to make this potential concrete, and also what the ultimate goal is, that when companies see that actually they need same type of data coming from the tractors, very detailed IoT Data Act opens a new potential for that type of data sharing. But then these companies who are operating on our ecosystems already start describing the data in the same way. So building these semi-structured data sets that then can more easily be used in a structured system or data platforms or integration platforms later on. So that's our approach. But in the end, we hope that we will be, no one needs us, only only as a telco operators, and then the markets start
Yeah, but I think
emerging on top of that.
and I think this is a very interesting point, because the way you have to address it in these use cases, it's labor intensive for you as well. Like for the farmers, it's not like you click a couple of buttons and then it works. You need to talk to not probably also individual farmers, but certainly farmers associations, and then technologies providers, but this is also hardware providers, tractor vendors, people
Yeah,
who have this
yeah,
kind of, and sensor providers. And I think for your case, Gard, you need to deal with research institutions and hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, because that's another issue then that you will have, and people say, pharmaceutical companies, is this for the public good, or is this to help somebody make billions, and do I want to help with that? So you're at the stage now where it's labor intensive. And that's also the question, like to which point can you generalize it and then hand it over at some point and say, look, I provide the infrastructure and I provide you with some tools. But certainly I think it's fair to say in the current stages that you're both in, it's quite labor intensive, and you need to spend probably as much time talking to people about what they want as you do in actually implementing solutions and technologies for it.
Yeah. We call us ourselves enablers and evangelists. So you need to change the mindset of both the service providers and the end users. And the advantages of network data economy, advantages are huge, as long as you know. But the happiest customer from my side is coming to us, hey, I have a problem and I see that you can solve this. So the business case is already there. Talking about databases, that then same as data warehousing or data lakes or anything, you shouldn't build the data warehouse or data lake or data space just for the sake of it, but you have to have a business case.
Mm-hmm. But I think probably you also have to spend a lot of time explaining to people why they would want to use a platform like this to share their data. Because I would imagine, I don't know, but I would imagine that a lot of times you also get people saying, okay, I see why this is beneficial for that person or that person, but this is my data. Why would I want to make it more easily available to somebody else? I'm probably more so, again, I'm looking for feedback in the agricultural case, where I might imagine that somebody says, look, I have my hands on the button, I get all this data. Now you want to share my data with somebody else. You have to explain to them, basically, this is not your data, or it should not be just your data, and also there are benefits to sharing it. And I mean, if I got it's in healthcare, it might be a little bit different, but even there, you will, I assume, say, okay, there's a major academic hospital that says, well, we spent 10 years of research collecting this data. I'm not just going to hand it out. So do you have to struggle a lot sort of convincing people on the public interest and the benefits of sharing this data?
Yes, and also showing that actually these farms generate a lot of data, and that's valuable because it's a completely new thinking. Also thinking in the terms of data economy inside of farming. Although smart agri is there and it's very data intensive, but anyway. So what we are thinking as one tool is to make these kind of data balance sheets available, showing what are your data assets and for what purposes that can be used, and then trying to tracking the value added from the whole value chain. Data that origins from the farms, how it's then aggregated, how it's reused in different services, trying to highlight a couple of end-to-end cases just to be able to speak in clear terms about the potential with data sharing and increased value for enriching the data.
I've never heard of that. I mean, we talk a lot about the data economy, but the idea of having data balance sheets where
Yeah.
you actually keep track of, what do you actually have? And maybe even at some point, what is it worth in euros or Norwegian crowns or or what money can you get from it? But also just who reuses it, because we talked
Yeah.
about this as well. A lot of this is also about getting public benefits, better healthcare research. But in the case of the farmers, also things like you mentioned, the fertilizer example. I'm guessing this is an EU-wide problem. There's a lot of discussions about nitrogen, about pollution, about climate impact. There too, there is a value to be extracted from that data. But part of the challenge is convincing people to release that data where they might say, oh, actually, this is not going to look great for me, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to benefit from giving you transparency on that.
The issues of data sharing also covers that now they actually see how bad my data is.
But that's part of the and people also think I only want to share if it's good. That's sort of a very understandable reflex, but actually not the right one, because you can't really solve problems if you're only sharing the stuff that makes you look good, basically.
And sharing and giving away they are different things.
On that point, we have a very punctual question, actually the most recent one in the chat right now, data monetization, because we do need to talk about money at some point. Separate from the issue about if anybody is trying to get wealthy, at any rate, you need sustainability. Somebody needs to put money down. And so I think, I guess maybe start with sort of an open question first, what your business models are, because I think, Gart, you linked to a very transparent pricing sheet on, if you want to use our system, if you're not a part of the university, there is a cost attached, because we are working here and somebody has to pay. And I'm guessing the same, well, I'm not guessing, somebody must be paying for data space as well. So I don't know if you can both comment on sort of your business model, who is currently paying, and how you see that in the future, because we're still at an early stage. Is it going to be companies? Do you need or expect governments to say at some point, this is very valuable and you're running part of my official databases, so I'll pay you for that? And feel free to comment on that as well, the data monetization from the users themselves. So can a farmer say, you can have my data, but I want X euros because I'm giving you this asset from my balance sheet?
To us, we're an infrastructure provider, so you consume infrastructure and you pay for that. That's the only way to make this sustainable. When it comes to taking a charge for data, In Norway, that was an idea around the Norwegian big project on health data analysis platform for Norwegian registry data, trying to get pharma to pay. I think that's a very dangerous way to go, because why should the government get paid when it's actually my data that the government has collected through some legal blah, blah, blah. So I think that's a no-go, because that would soon make speculative companies using GDPR to get data from the government and sell it in an easier way than the government can do it, and they can both sue the government for not handing it out and selling data. So, when it comes to other data sets, that's not from a person, but it's expensive to make the data set. I think that's a totally different question, and it should be as free as possible. But if someone makes a very, very important data set and has put a lot of money in that, maybe there should be some mechanism. But I think it's a bit dangerous way, especially for personal data. I hope we don't get there.
Yeah. So in our case, the actual pricing is based on the amount of data types or diversity in data that gets transmitted or that gets operated. So, and that's a broad scope for our earnings. I think you could compare us to telco operators. So volumes are basically the mechanism for pricing, and then of course cybersecurity, different levels of that. So that's a logic. But first we need to attire new services and kind of feed the market to demand for the services. So we are not. I've heard some estimates that it's 2 to 5 years before we actually have a pull from the markets for this kind of data sharing. So it's very much to our owners to support us, and also when we are thinking this agricultural sector, it's very much for the national reserves as well. So security topics are there. So I think there are plans, even EU-wide plans about this permit or consent-based data sharing, giving farms kind of opportunity to consent for data sharing and control the data flows, just to get some value from the data they are already generating, or to have the national up-to-date view on what are the national reserves at the moment. So those type of activities are of course talked with the authorities, and when Traficom is kind of controlling us, we are in the Swedish position being a private company, but then also ruled by Traficom, or governed, or kind of monitored by Traficom. So it's an interesting mix. But then if you go to the micro level, the example I was giving from two or smaller companies, SMEs, who are building the original services for one purpose, and then asking a consent from the farmer to reuse the data also for insurance company for new kind of product development. They are already agreeing that either the monthly fee for the service will be lower for those farmers who consent for the reuse of the data, or then there will be some additional economic compensations for the data holders. So I think we are starting to see the logic there, but it's going to be a tough road.
Oh, yeah, because I think sort of general trend is pay for the service, yes, because somebody must pay. Pay for the data, that's an option, but certainly not a general rule, because the devil is in the details, and it's not necessarily payment in the sense of, you get euros for or Norwegian crowns for your data, but also in the sense of, look, you get a benefit, an immaterial, but like for the farmers, you can say, look, if somebody else can reuse your data, even at the aggregate level, so that we can get insights or statistics, you pay less for this particular service. So it's granular there, and probably also fair to say, we're still in the learning stages yet.
Absolutely.
Another example might be that the farmer is selling a batch of crop grain, she sells it with a bunch of information. These are the features of this batch, and these can be used either for making macarons or beer. And if that's kind of a selection made, they get a higher price for the product, which higher value.
And of course traceability. If you can
Yeah.
prove traceability, that's one of the incentives for how we see that there will be a business for this kind of more detailed, more granular data intermediation services.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's a fast. You see also in the chat, there's a bunch of people who are very interested in sort of the economics behind it, and looking at interactions with data cooperatives. And I think this is also, especially in the agricultural sector, this is much more common, that you have cooperatives, farmers saying, look, individually, I have very little data and I have very little market controlling power. But with cooperatives, I'm guessing that's part of your constituency, part of your audience as well, that you talk to these organizations.
Empowering the farmers.
Yeah, but unfortunately, still in Finland, it's pretty much in a research project still. So I know that there are data cooperatives very active in other European countries, but we are getting there, and there are some discussions, but not like in a national level yet.
That's actually a very cool hint for me to go to another topic that I did want to touch on, the cross-border part, so the expansion, because you both have very very clear and advanced and functioning solutions. I don't know if this is a risk or an opportunity, how you need to look at it, but definitely multiple member states are developing comparable solutions, which is good, and that can be complementary. Like you said, there doesn't need to be sort of any antagonism there. And I think the fact that you're both, I guess there's a two-step question. First is, I think you're both quite open on how you function, both sort of an architecture and governance rules, or even open source software code, and you can say, okay, this is how we're doing it. If you want to do your own thing, go ahead with it. You don't have to pay me, although I'd recommend that, because then you simplify that the investment part, but you can go up and set it up on your own. So this is how you can sort of disseminate your solutions. But there's also the other part, like how do you expand to new markets? And we've seen these questions, for instance, in the context of European health data spaces. I mean, I don't have to tell you, that's kind of a hot topic as well. We want more data to flow across the European Union. Do you think that your solutions are kind of a building block or a stepping stone towards those data spaces? Or do you see yourself more sort of stepwise expanding to neighboring markets? I guess the question is, so how do you see, the dissemination of your services or of your technologies, and what can be done there, how that can be facilitated?
Well, internet has no home. It's international. So technically, everything can be done, even in a consent sense way. Exchanging consent between Finland and Belgium seems to be okay, because everybody understands the consents in the same way. Technically, it's doable, but the obstacles are somewhere else, I think.
Well, probably, I would imagine, I mean, I think you probably all can comment on that. Obviously, the practical stuff, language barriers, that's one thing, especially if you want to interact with end users. I mean, with administrations and with large organizations, it probably works. But when you go to the patient level or to the farmer level, okay, now you need to speak the local language. That's one issue. But also just cultural and administrative traditions. I think for a guy, for instance, in your case, a lot of the questions related also, like who in Norway, in terms of, I think it was health archives, for instance, that you talked about. You talked about cancer registers, which I think a lot of countries have. You have interactions there. And that's probably easier in your own country. I don't know how it would go if you'd go to Belgium and say, hey, you guys have a cancer register as well. Shouldn't I be holding that? That's a very different discussion, as of course, in those things.
So first of all, as you said, we're extremely open to what we have done, and we've recently been in Scotland trying to help a university there who wants to build up something similar. And we're clear and say that it's complicated, but this is one way to do it. We try to use the EOSC marketplace, and we want to be more visible there, but it's not been a big uptake. I think the European ID is one of the things that will drive our growth. Of course, there's a question: how much do you want to grow? How big do you want to be? There's a risk also being big within a university. Do you get too big? Will you be kicked out? But European ID is extremely important, because for the researchers, they will increase their cohorts, and also it will be much easier to consume the service without having a Zoom session, showing your passport and so on to get on board as a PI. And then when it comes to moving data, the GDPR should have opened up for that to make it easier to move data across borders, but then still countries have special legislations, like Danish health registry data cannot be moved outside of Denmark. So when we collaborate with Danish data, we have to move Norwegian data to Denmark, or do distributed computing. And I think distributed computing is really, really hard. So then at least when it's small amounts of data, we should move the data. When there is enormous amounts of data, we must do smarter things. But I think we are kind of seeing the limit of our growth in Norway now. It's stable. So we're looking into new markets, but we haven't no silver bullet yet. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And this, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, just saying that it's an interesting position, because now when we are this EU recognized data intermediation service provider, we can operate in all European countries, EU countries. So, but I think the licensing model needs to be completely different, and because you need to be close to the markets. But basically, that has been our goal, and then also this potato X case, data sharing from Belgium farmers with the Finnish farmers. I think these are the type of cross-border cases we want to facilitate, and then build also these not just single markets for data, but also single markets for agricultural, like exports.
Exactly. I think this data spaces approach is part of the building blocks. I don't know if you need a data space for everything. I know there was a question in the chat also about, for instance, financial data spaces, but I don't know if it's possible for any of you to comment on that. But I think the sort of the bigger strategic point is the EU can give you some of these building blocks, like the legal framework for intermediation services. So I can say, yes, I comply with the law. You don't have to check because these are the European rules. I comply. So that's one thing. Or the EIDAS elements, where you say you have legislation about which identities and which signatures are reliable, and those are accepted across the European Union. It doesn't fix everything, but it creates some of the building blocks. And then I think right now a lot of this is sort of at an experimental stage, where we try to find solutions between some organizations, between some member states. And then I just think, okay, do we need to scale it up? How do we scale it up? And also seeing, like, do we need new governance organizations? Because I would imagine you can't all become specialists in every possible industry. I'd very much like to, I think data space is not yet specialized in financial data spaces, I would assume. Like, I don't know how far you've gotten on that part yet. No, that's a very specific regulated sector as well, of course. Yeah. I just wanted to pick your brain, I think, because we're almost out of time, but I think I wanted to pick your brain on one more thing. So there have been a couple of questions, because it's 2024, I have to ask about artificial intelligence and sort of whether that sort of raises additional or new levels of concern. I guess this is just a question about sort of controlling usage. Are either one of you sort of worried about artificial intelligence accessing the data and learning things, making inferences, or do you see this more as a supporting technology, where you say, actually, artificial intelligence will help us as well to scale up, to provide more, to provide more capacity in terms of the services that we provide? Or do you say, look, AI, cool, but not a problem yet, and not a solution yet for us?
It's kind of not an easy answer, but when it's useful, it should be used. But at the moment, it seems that if we are trying to talk about data economy on a broader level, said, hey, AI has solved all the problems. No, let's get back in talking in 5 years, and then you understand why it didn't solve the problem. So the technology boom is leaving these kind of data economy experiments, kind of the data economy stuff, but this is really is cool. So getting into shadow. But when it's useful, it's useful.
I think it's going to have a high impact, but I also think it's really, really important to moderate it and have some rules and regulations. I think the EU AI Act was recently okayed now. I'm not 100% sure, but I think regulation, and that's what the boss of NVIDIA says himself. Of course, it should be regulated and it must be regulated by governments, but I think the impact will be high. And I'm not sure that if you think globally, I'm not sure that AI will have the best impact at the very start, thinking of how it's used to manipulate social media and all those, but that's outside of this text. But I'm a bit worried in that case, but for research, I think it's going to have a high positive impact.
Mm.
Excellent. Good to hear. We are out of time, but I just want to invite you. Well, two things. First of all, a very important thing for the people in the audience. So I have another session 3 weeks from now on personal data management. So a related topic. We'll be talking more about data sovereignty and data ownership. So if you want to stay informed on these things, please do keep an eye out for other webinars as well. We had actually a series of webinars on the AI Act as well. So I think that's, it's a good way to stay abreast of European policy developments without having to spend hours reading up on legislation and websites. I'm going to just give the floor to our panelists for a moment to see, sort of closing statement. Actually, maybe I just want to ask, do you have like a wish? If you could say, this is what I would want to have in terms of data sovereignty, if I could have my way, this is a problem I'd like to see solved nationally, or member states or organizations. Sort of what would you prefer to see? I think maybe, Gard, do you have a wish to say, if I could get one thing done for TSD or for this problem as a whole, what would you want?
I would wish for the enormous big IT project to stop, and that we let IT grow as a dynamic thing with emergence and rebuilding stuff. That's my wish.
More question and demand and less projects.
Yes.
Perfect. And the colleagues from Data Space, I don't know if you have any sort of, what would be your wish?
I think our promise is to be provide profitable business from shared data. So I really, as a CEO for the company, I really wish that we will see this profitable business in 5 years or so. This new approach is really needed. That's my personal mission as well. So
I think that's a good wish for all of us. We're hoping for a prosperous data economy, and we hope to be a part of it. I think that's a good one. Okay, then I think we have to close it up now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, audience, for the great questions again. It's always fun to have such an interactive crowd. Webinars are not an easy format for that, but thank you for the audience. Thank you especially also to the speakers for the great presentations and for the interactive debates. I think I learned a lot. I think the audience learned a lot. I hope you learned something as well. And the last point, so everyone will get a copy of the recordings of the slides, and you will have, you can provide feedback to the session via the QR code on the screen. Feel free to provide us with suggestions, what you liked, disliked, or what you would like to hear in the future, and we'll do our best to accommodate you. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm wishing you an excellent day still, and after that, an excellent weekend.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.